members of the Budget.
Go ahead, Mayor Strom. Mayor Strom, can you hear me?
Do you hear music? Yeah. No, there it stopped.
Yeah, sorry, that was channel 8.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. I call to order the virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council on May 20th. Do you hear music? Yeah. No, there it stopped.
Yeah, sorry, that was channel 8.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. I call to order the virtual study of the Council on May 20th.
Deja vu.
All over again.
If everyone could just mute real
I'll
quick.
just sit here patiently.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're streaming this, or if you have the channel 8 running in the background, then it'll cause the feedback.
Everyone could just mute real quick.
Oh, hang on one second. There we go. I think that. Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mayor Strom.
Take two. I call to order the virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council on May 20th, 2024 at 7:15 p.m. To connect to the Lakewood City Council meeting, please use one of the following links at Lakewood Speaks. That's lakewoodspeaks.org or lakewood.org/council videos. For online public comments, you can post comments of any link to lakewoodspeaks.org, which is our online forum for public comments, and it will be left open until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for any comments related to tonight's presentations. Tonight's presentations will be an update from our Budget and Audit Board, as well as our Housing Policy Commission. With that, I will go ahead and hand it over to our City Clerk, Mr. Rob, for a roll call.
Mayor Strom.
Here.
Councilors Cruz.
Here.
LeBure.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mayakaru.
Here.
Nystrom.
Here.
Councilor Over is absent. Councilors Ryan.
Present.
Charzai.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
And Stewart.
Here.
Great. Mayor Strom, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you so much. And I've got a quick question for you, Mr. Rob, about my comments relating to putting public comments on lakewoodspeaks.org. It is not currently open for comments on the Budget and Audit Board portion of our meeting this evening. Is that something that we can still get opened up?
I think it's open, but yeah, we'll make sure it looks open.
Okay.
But I'll make sure. I'll send a test comment.
Maybe
through.
there's just not a comment left yet. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. All right. And with that, then I will go ahead and hand it off to the chair of our Budget and Audit Board, Councilor Rebecca Stewart. Councilor Stewart, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to kind of frame the way that we are planning to present to you as a Budget and Audit Board. I do want to note that this is a joint study session with our Budget and Audit Board, and we do have 3 community members who are members of this board. So as we're having the discussion, I would love to, hear from our community members as well in the decision-making consensus that we're going to be asked to do at the end. I just kind of want to set this discussion up for everyone. The Budget and Audit Board has been working for the past several years. Quite frankly, these conversations started before I was elected to council and came onto the Budget and Audit Board, but particularly in the last couple of years as we have been presented by our finance department with kind of our ongoing outlook for the future funding of the city. As we all know, Lakewood is aging. We are nearly 60 years old as a city now, and we have a lot of initial investments in infrastructure that are now kind of starting to need to be supported, and there's a lot of infrastructure upkeep that is required for our citizens and the services that we come to expect from our city. So currently, the city of Lakewood asked the voters several years ago if we would be able to retain Tabor dollars predominantly from sales tax. That is what our main revenue source is as a city, in order to invest in kind of 3 buckets, being parks and open space acquisition, infrastructure and streets and sidewalk paving, and then police and public safety. So that is going to be expiring here in a couple of years. The end of 2026, I believe, is kind of when, because everything is 1 year behind, as we heard in the LRA, really the pause ends in 2025, and then those funds carry over to 2026. And we're looking at the future financial health of the city and our ability to continue to fund services at a level that our community has come to expect. So you will be hearing from our CFO to kind of give you the lay of the land and the same information that the Budget and Audit Board has been hearing for the last several years, which was really the basis for our decision to move forward with connecting with and hiring a consulting to do a community survey and some polling of our citizens in Lakewood. We wanted to hear from the citizens in Lakewood, especially post-COVID, have our priorities changed, have the things that our community cares about our city, making sure that we are continuing to invest in and serve our community with, have those priorities changed or shifted in any ways so that we can be as responsive with our tax dollars as possible to the citizens that we represent. And then secondly, whether or not there is any interest from the community for potentially continuing to pool those resources and continue to make those investments in the future of our city long term. So those were the questions that we asked in this initial survey. At the end of our CFO's presentation, you will be hearing from Ryan, who is with Magellan, and he is actually going to present us all with the results of this first initial community survey. And then I will come back. We have had some good discussions, Ryan and I, and we have some evidence-based options for moving forward. There is a pretty strict timeline for how these things need to go. And so we will be asking for consensus for a decision to move forward. Well, you'll be presented with 4 different options, and that will kind of be the basis for our discussion. Which one of those 4 options, based on the results of the community survey, we want to move forward with into a potential second round of public polling, if that is the direction that we want to go in. So that is teeing up in hopefully a nice bow the way that this discussion needs to go. So we will be looking for consensus from both the council and the Budget and Audit Board. We wanted to bring the whole council into this discussion at this point in time, just to have line of sight and input into what our next steps are going to be. So that's what I'm going to be asking all of us to please be considering and to please be keeping in the context of our discussions moving forward. So with that, I would like to present Holly Bjorklund, who is the CFO of the City of Lakewood.
Thank you for the introduction, Councilor Stewart. Everyone can see me, I'm assuming, correct? And I'm going to share my screen. And you see the presentation? Good.
Yep, got it, Holly.
Great. So this presentation is I'm providing on behalf of the Budget and Audit Board. And just to let you know, there is a recorded version of the financial part of this update on Lakewood Speaks in case the council or any citizens would like to review it again. So as Councilor Stewart had talked about, or actually I should say chair, we'll first be providing a high-level review of what was shared and discussed in the Budget and Audit Board meetings on city long-term financial plans. We also have Ryan Winger from Magellan Strategies here, who will be sharing the survey results. And Magellan Strategies conducted the survey. So in 2022, long-term financial challenges for the city were shared with the Budget and Audit Board. Since then, the Budget and Audit Board has dedicated multiple meetings to understanding the financial situation and identify solutions beyond looking at just the next year's budget. As the city has become an established city and the infrastructure is aging, there needs to be a shift to more city funds being spent on maintenance and replacement. There are limited funds expected to be available for this investment. Additionally, starting in 2026, revenue over the Tabor limit will be returning to the taxpayers and no longer funding parklands, infrastructure, and police expenses. These challenges create a revenue expense gap since community needs are expected to continue to grow and the city's infrastructure will continue to age. Next we'll review what was included in the 2024 budget for the general fund and the capital improvement funds. The bars on this general fund chart show revenue, the orange bars, expenses, which are the purple bars, and Tabor funds, which are the green bars. This is this reflects the 2022 actuals, 2023 revised budget, 2024 budget, and 2025 through 2028 forecast. The white line shows the fund balance change from 2022 actuals through the 2028 forecast. You can see the green Tabor bars on top of the orange revenue bars for the year 22 through 25. This is reflecting the revenue that came into the general fund and is transferred over to the Tabor fund. The revenue above the Tabor limit that are projected in 26 through 28 shows the estimated revenue being returned to the taxpayer because it is beyond 2025. This is approximately $8 million per year. You can see this below the zero line on the graph. Over multiple years, the city has intentionally been restricting general fund spending to save for the large investments I spoke about on the previous slide. You can see these savings with the 2022 fund balance of $76.7 million. Some of these investments are forecasted to be spent from 2024 through 2028. On the graph, you can see the fund balance is drawn down to $28.5 million in 28, which is bringing the balance down to the recommended GFOA minimum reserve percentage. The large investments in this time period are land acquisitions of a new maintenance campus for $7 million in the general fund and $8 million in the capital investment fund, so totaling $15 million. And also a loan in the stormwater fund, a loan for the stormwater fund for the North Dry Gulch floodplain project for $19.7 million, and homelessness services and community support for $45 million. The Tabor refunds start in 2026, continuing to draw down the fund balance as the city is unable to keep the revenue above the Tabor limit. This leaves little remaining funds in 2028 to address other large projects or community interests. For the Capital Improvement Fund, the orange bars represents annual revenue, the purple bars are expense, and the white line is the fund balance for the 2022 through 2028, as it was shown on the general fund chart. In 2023, there was a facility conditions assessment completed and reviewed with the Budget and Audit Board. However, there needs to be more analysis completed before the facility needs are incorporated in the capital improvement budget. As you can see, the fund balance declines in 23 and 24 due to $3 million for the Colfax Safety Project and $8 million for the maintenance campus land purchase, as I just mentioned on the previous slide. For 2024 through 2028, the budget includes ongoing standard spending, such as street maintenance and sidewalk projects. In 2028, the fund balance is projected to recover almost back to the 22 level because the building investments have not been included in the planning yet. Now we have covered at a summary level what is included in the city's 24 five-year plan. I will discuss what is not included in the 5-year plan for the general fund and the capital improvement fund. Over many years, there has been limited funds available for maintenance, repairs, and replacement for city buildings. In 2023, the city commissioned a facility condition study to aid in prioritizing building repairs, replacement, and estimating their useful life. This study will assist the city and the Budget and Audit Board to understand the magnitude of need and will provide a foundation for planning future investments. There are 69 buildings, and the oldest building is the Stone House, built in 1860. There's a wide range of need for repair, maintenance, or replacement. The consultants provided estimated costs to either replace or maintain buildings in 10 to 20-year increments. The cost of replacement for the city buildings in 10 years is $575 million, and in 20 years is $769 million. For maintenance, these buildings, for maintenance, these buildings, the 10-year cost is $57 million, and the 20-year cost is $133 million if none are renovated or replaced during that time. This is just to give you a reference point for the magnitude of the cost of maintaining the city buildings. There are a multitude of different choices the city can make which will change the cost of maintaining and replacing, such as a building could be eliminated so the building no longer needs to be maintained, or the city could maintain a building longer than its useful life and delay replacement. Over the next 3 to 5 years, it is estimated for a need of $23 million to be spent on safety, performance, integrity, accessibility, and retrofit adaptations. Although the city spends on average $5 million annually on building maintenance, this does not include all the items included in the study. The city has spent or budgeted $3.2 million to date to tackle the highest priority needs from the study. However, the remaining needs have not been forecasted yet for the general or the capital improvement fund. Now that the facility study has been completed, the next steps is to perform more detailed study on high priority buildings. The need and usage of buildings should be assessed along with the opportunities to use other existing buildings in different capacities. Here are some renovations, additions, or replacement examples. After land purchase for the maintenance campus, there will be design and building costs ranging from $25 million to $75 million. The public safety center could be up to $64 million when it needs to be replaced. And there's an estimated $5 to $17 million in Bear Creek Lake Park improvements. And these are just a few of the examples. In addition to facility infrastructure and infrastructure investment, the City Council also has 6 priorities for 2024, which are trust and accountability in government, affordable housing, homelessness, public safety, transportation and infrastructure, sustainability, and thriving economy. Now that we've discussed some of the additional investments and City Council priorities, let's look at how much room is left in the general fund for the 5-year forecast that is established in 2024. Previously, we discussed that the forecast for the general fund is $28.5 million at the end of 28, which is just under the GFOA recommended amount for reserve. If an additional $10.2 million is forecasted for high priority repairs, this would bring the general fund down to the city's required reserve level of 10% and $18.3 million. The $23 million of high priority needs would partially be addressed with utilizing the additional $10.2 million of the general fund balance. For the capital improvement fund, an additional $23.5 million could be utilized and will bring the fund balance down to $2.8 million, which is a 11.5% reserve. $12.8 million could be used for the remainder of the 3 to 5 years high priority repairs in areas like safety, performance, accessibility, and the remaining 10.7 could be used for investments. However, as we discussed, this is not enough for the facility needs or the City Council priorities. As in many cases, there is more need or demand than available funds. So there needs to be a prioritization process. This is done during the budget process. After the ongoing required spending is identified, the prioritization process starts with community priorities and City Council goals. The revenue is estimated and then expenses to determine what can be addressed and when. In addition to prioritizing, different funding sources need to be considered for future needs. The city explores the potential for reducing current spending through finding efficiencies and innovation in existing operations. This is an activity that is continuously done throughout the departments to make sure funds are being utilized effectively. Next is reallocating existing funds. There's ongoing evaluation on services based on facility usage, program costs, and community feedback. The city also has an effective process for applying for and receiving grants. There have been sizable grants awarded to the city in the past years. Lakewood has made partnerships with local government and nonprofits. The city leverages the value of collaboration with their partners. Some examples are partnerships with Jefferson County, Colorado Gives, and Recovery Works. Debt is another option for funding. This includes bonds and certificate of participation. Additionally, there is an option to lift TABOR limits by the voter. Next, we will talk about what is TABOR. TABOR, otherwise known as the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, is a Colorado constitutional amendment that limits government revenue increases to inflation plus local growth. There are different components within TABOR, such as all tax increases, and most bond loans require a citizen vote. TABOR requires a 3% fund balance reserve, and voters may alter or eliminate TABOR. Here's the calculation for how the TABOR limit is determined. Consumer Price Index, or CPI, includes common consumer spending items such as fuel, clothing, food, housing, costs, etc. We add that to local growth of new construction, and that equals allowable growth, or the TABOR limit. TABOR requires two limit calculations: overall revenue and property tax. On average, about 70% of the total city revenue are subject to the TABOR limit. This is a timeline of the previous voter-approved lifting of TABOR limits. There have been 2 temporary liftings of TABOR with 9-year sunsets, 1998 to 2006, and the most recent approved election in 2018, retaining revenue from 2017 to the end of 2025. For the current lifting of TABOR limits, Lakewood voters approved allowing Lakewood to retain $12.5 million in 2017. $8.5 million of these funds were allocated to parkland acquisitions, and $2 million each allocated for police needs and transportation improvements. For 2018 through 2025, TABOR revenue is split evenly between police, transportation, and parkland. This slide reflects what was historically refunded and what was transferred to the TABOR fund. The red bars reflect the historical and projected refunds. The gold bars are retained and projected to retain based on the voter approval. Fund Funds above the Tabor limit will start going back to the taxpayer as of 2026, and other fund sources will need to be identified for ongoing programs, which is approximately $1.5 million annually. It is estimated $8 million per year will be refunded to residents from 26 through 28. This slide provides greater detail of how the 2017 through 2025 Tabor funds are being spent for police. It includes public safety projects like the body-worn camera program, police vehicle and equipment purchases, and health and wellness for police agents. Body-worn camera program has an ongoing expense allocated with its operations that will need to continue to be funded beyond 2025. If Tabor dollars are retained in the future, the scope of these projects could potentially include funding the ongoing costs of the body-worn camera program, including upgrades and support, and developing a real-time crime center. This slide provides greater detail of how the 2017 through 25 Tabor funds are being spent for parklands. It includes park improvements and parkland open space acquisitions that have been completed, as well as projects that are underway. There is a maintenance of cost of $600,000 associated with the parkland acquisitions that will need to be funded through other sources in 2026. If Tabor dollars are retained in the future, the community has expressed interest in additional park development and improvements, park acquisition in underserved areas, recreation facility capital improvements, and trail improvements and missing connections. This slide provides greater detail on how the 2017 through 2025 Tabor funds are being spent for infrastructure. It includes sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, and traffic signal projects. If Tabor dollars are retained in the future, the community has expressed interest in additional traffic signal replacements, street rehabilitation, and bicycle facility and safety. That was a hard word to say. After the Budget and Audit Board has an understanding of what we just discussed, the board wanted to hear from the community what their spending and investment priorities are for the city. This led to the request to hire a survey research partner and conduct a community survey. Magellan Strategies was hired to conduct the survey called What Do You Want for Lakewood? Beyond the outreach done by Magellan, the city also used various channels for communication to try to broaden the outreach in Lakewood. Here are some examples of how the survey outreach was done. The survey was made accessible through cell phone texting, Lakewood websites, citywide newsletters, and various social media forums. The outreach and the survey was provided in English and Spanish. This outreach resulted in 32,416 touch points, and the total survey collected was 1,941, with 424 that clicked on the survey on the city website. This is the end of the update on the city. At the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned there is a recorded version of this presentation on Lakewood Speaks. If you would like to share it in ward meetings or with individuals, it's available for you. And now I will turn it over to Ryan Winger from Magellan Strategies to share the results of What Do You Want for Lakewood survey. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Holly, and good evening, everyone. I just want to make sure, can you all, let me see here. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, let's get right into it. This is what was, again, as Holly mentioned, titled the What Do You Want for Lakewood survey that was conducted from April 11th to the 28th, so really the second half of the month of April. And Holly covered a lot of the methodology and how the city was helping to spread a link to the survey. Over here, you'll see an example of a text message that was received by a random sample of voters from our end, just again inviting them to participate in the survey and letting them know the importance of participating. And so, as Holly mentioned, we were able to interview a total of 1,941 Lakewood residents, which is an awesome response rate. And kudos to the city team for all the work that was done on their end. And so given that response total, we have a margin of error of 2.21, which is really solid and gives us kind of a confident feeling going forward, especially because these survey results are weighted to match what we expect presidential year election turnout to look like within the city of Lakewood. And I know there's a lot of numbers going on this slide, but just so you all have kind of some context of how the survey was weighted, we have the red box there around the year 2020, which is the last comparable election, obviously the last presidential election. And so you can see the important demographic groups there of gender, age group, and party, and how the survey was weighted along those lines. And there are also demographic slides at the end of the survey if you want to refer to those as well. So let's get right into it. We wanted to ask kind of some icebreaker questions before we dove fully into the idea of TABOR retention. And again, as Councillor Stewart laid out at the beginning, really the survey had kind of two purposes. One was to gauge the extent to which any priorities have changed among Lakewood residents since the last time TABOR retention was approved in 2018, and then to test any interest in extending or expanding that retention. And so the first question we wanted to ask is, generally speaking, do you approve of the job the city is doing, managing services, programs, and initiatives? And the reason why we want to ask a question like this is just to see if there is any underlying concern just in general that these respondents might have with how the city is doing that might obviously color the opinions of TABOR retention. And what we find is that there's really nothing to be too concerned about here. 55% approve, 31% disapprove, and 14% have no opinion. Really, we do a lot of this kind of survey work around Colorado and around the country, and 55% job approval on providing services is really pretty typical, pretty average measurement. You see the largest group there is the 43% that somewhat approve. So really, again, we're looking for kind of a red flag of concern that would kind of give pause to the whole effort going forward, and we don't see that here. We then wanted to ask, just in general, among those who approve of the job the city's doing, why? What is it that you approve of? And here are the kind of the four common themes: public safety and emergency services, parks and recreation, community and cultural engagement, and infrastructure and city maintenance. And you'll notice that obviously, three of those four obviously align pretty well with kind of the categories that the TABOR retention is currently spent on, as outlined by Holly in the presentation we just saw. Among those who disapprove of the job the city's doing, these are the themes that emerge: poor infrastructure management, issues with homelessness and crime around the city, mismanagement of public funds, and uncontrolled development and poor planning. So among that percentage of respondents that roughly 31% that disapprove of the job the city's doing, those were the themes that came out. We then wanted to ask, again, before we're giving them any lists, before we're giving them any kind of information, what are the top 2 or 3 issues off the top of your head that the city should be addressing the most? And these are really the 5 that stood out. Homelessness and housing affordability, those were the top 2 that the city should be addressing: traffic and road maintenance, crime and safety, development, and land use. So those were kind of the core themes. Again, we're asking respondents without giving them really too much information, just wanting them to off the top of their head, what's most concerning to them. Those are the 5 that come to the top. And then we wanted to get a sense of, okay, we asked a general job approval of the city providing services. What about if we look at these specific services individually? Do you approve or disapprove of the job the city's doing? And you see here 77%, so a very strong measurement in terms of community resources, things like arts, parks, and recreation. Police, 63% approve. Public Works, 56% approve. So those services that are most appreciated by respondents, again, align pretty well with the three buckets, the three categories that are currently funded by these Tabor retained funds. And then really the bottom four here are lower, but mostly lower because of a higher no opinion, right? So just folks, generally the average respondent just has less interaction with the city clerk or the municipal court or the planning and zoning. And so naturally there's going to be higher no opinion, although you do see among planning and zoning, 47% disapprove. And a lot of that is coming from, the themes or those folks that we saw in the previous slides that are just concerned about overdevelopment and things like that. We, again, just want to icebreaker kind of benchmark question. Do you agree or disagree that the city of Lakewood is fiscally responsible and spends taxpayer money wisely? Again, just trying to see if there's any kind of underlying concern that we should be aware of. 47% agree, 34% disagree, 19% no opinion. To put this in context, really what we're looking for here is whether this is what we'd call upside down, whether the disagree is actually higher than the agree, which does happen in some cases. We don't see that here. Really anything close to or above 50% on this measurement is just something that's pretty typical. And so this is, again, nothing to really create a red flag or cause any major concern on this front. Then we wanted to ask them, the city obviously has to make budget decisions and priorities every year. Please indicate the importance of each of these issues when it comes to the city's budget. And these are ranked in order of the percentage of respondents who said that they're at least somewhat important. And so we're not talking about frivolous services that the city providing. Obviously, all of these are going to be over 50%, at least somewhat important. But seeing them this way does kind of help to somewhat prioritize, or more or less, they're not ranking them against each other, but just kind of just get some idea of what folks consider most important in terms of the city's budget. And you see there 96% say roadway maintenance, resurfacing, snow plowing, and street sweeping. So overwhelmingly, that's what's considered a really core city service. And then right underneath that, parks and recreation planning and management. And then 86% say police services are at least somewhat important. And you see there we have the intensity, the very important percentages. Important to note as well, where nearly 2/3 say police services are very important. And over 70% say roadway maintenance is very important. And so we're really talking about core services that the city provides. And then we're going to go down the list and see, look, these things are also viewed as very important, or at least somewhat important. 82% housing affordability, with 59% very important. Economic development, obviously an important thing that the city should be focused on, although less intensity there. Only 39% say very important. Going on down the list, residential and commercial permitting, land planning and development, that's important, 80%, with 43% very important. On down the list, homelessness services, community outreach and communication, sustainable infrastructure, and then city events, gatherings, concerts, and holiday celebrations. So that one obviously is a little bit of a drop off at only 18% very important. But still, over half respondents say, yeah, that's at least somewhat important when we're thinking about what the city should and shouldn't be prioritizing in terms of its budget. Now we're going to get into the specifics of what may be proposed here. But before we continue, you should know that the Budget and Audit Board that provides financial oversight has started this discussion, but no decisions have been made. Right? We're trying to convey to the respondents that your participation in this survey is very valuable. It's an important part of the discussion, and we want to hear from you moving forward on this important issue. And we're just going to do a little bit of educating on the process here, or the timeline, really. The Budget and Audit Board has started this discussion. As you may know, voters approved in 2018 a ballot measure allowing the city to retain excess Tabor revenue until the end of 2025, and the 3 bullet points informing them of how these funds are spent. informing them that this is roughly $8 million per year is what this amounts to. And knowing all that, would you vote yes to allow the city to retain these funds through 2035? Or would you vote no, in which case the funds would be returned to taxpayers? And here's what we see in terms of the ballot test there. 52% would vote yes, 41% would vote no, and 7% undecided. And so clearly, it's pretty well split here when we lay it out and give them that information. A small majority would vote yes to continue to retain funds through 2035, but 41%, so a large number would vote no, given that information. And again, only 7% undecided. And you'll see there on the right side, I haven't mentioned these too much, but you'll see on the right side just the important kind of demographic subgroups, and you can see the differences among those as well. Obviously, we didn't want to just end the survey there. We want to share some information about how the city's been using these funds, just to inform the respondent a little bit more, give them some information to see, if you knew this information, how would that change your opinion on whether to vote yes or no on the ballot measure? And what tested the best was just simply explaining retained revenue has funded important city infrastructure and transportation needs with these 5 bullet points. So just giving them some idea of what these funds have been spent on since they were last approved, and things like repairing and replacing sidewalks, adding paths, adding traffic signals, and the West Colfax Safety Project. That causes 2/3 of respondents to be more likely to approve of retaining these funds. 63% are more likely to approve once they know what the public safety dollars have been spent on. Things like officer body-worn cameras, hiring specialized staff to support that, and then investing in health and wellness assessment for all officers and public safety personnel. So these things are valued, obviously, and respondents, upon learning that, 63% are more likely to approve. More information that we gave to them is this idea that the city keeps Tabor dollars retained in an entirely separate fund from the rest of the city budget, something that a lot of folks may not be familiar with, and that they can go to lakewood.org/Lakewood funding to see exactly how those funds are spent. So that level of transparency that's there. And that causes over 60% of folks to say, yep, that resonates. That makes me more likely to approve. And then also the piece of information that the city council voted to decrease the mill levy to provide some property tax relief to homeowners this year. 60% are more likely to approve. And just, to put it in context, when we do a survey like this, really anything over 60%, that should be part of the conversation. Anything over 70% is a home run. So these are kind of right in that area of, yeah, these are important kind of talking points and what the city should be highlighting and discussing as folks become more familiar with Tabor retention and how these funds are used. And then also we wanted to, the last piece of information we gave them is that the city has expanded open space and parklands and provided this graphic showing them exactly what that has looked like in terms of both acquisitions and improvements. And that, knowing that information, 50% were more likely to approve retaining the funds. So then we get to what we call the informed ballot test. Really, given all that information that you just read, we're going to ask you again the same information, ending in December 31st, 2035. Here's the areas for spending. It's roughly $8 million per year is what's been collected since 2017. Knowing all this, how would you vote? And you see that support or the percentage voting yes moves up 4 points to 56%, with 35% still voting no and 9% undecided. What's interesting on this is when you look at the intensity, the largest group actually is the group that's definitely voting yes. And so clearly some folks, the information that they read or heard about really resonated with them. And then the next highest group is 26% that would probably vote yes. So we do see a nice bump in support once folks learn a little bit more about how these funds are used beyond just the bullet points that were ultimately in the ballot language to begin with. And we didn't want to leave it there. We wanted to ask why you'd vote yes. And here's the themes. They believe in the importance of these infrastructure improvements, and they want to see, they agree that pooling these funds in the past has had a significant impact on the community rather than just kind of small individual refunds that they would otherwise receive. They just generally support funding essential services, things like police. Education came up in there. Obviously, none of this money is going to the schools, but the average resident or respondent may not be aware of that. Maybe that's something that needs to be at least part of the education. Financial efficiency and transparency. Again, they appreciate these funds being in a separate fund and the transparency, the accountability that the city has built in. And then just generally, there is among some of these respondents just an opposition to Tabor and the idea that removing or adjusting these restrictions could better serve the city. Now, let's contrast that with those who would vote no and why they would vote no. Here's the themes that come across for these folks: fiscal responsibility and government distrust. They have a general distrust of how the city's managing funds already. They see it as a negative personal financial impact on them, and they would rather have the funds returned to them. And that just goes again to the principles of part of Tabor, or at least this part of Tabor, which was, in their view, designed to limit government growth. And they want those funds to be returned to them as taxpayers. Government transparency, and efficiency. Again, these folks are folks who just want to see more on that front, and then just opposition to funding methods and priorities. And so these are folks that think, I may come around if these funds were used differently, but as currently used, I believe they're not managed correctly, and they view them as they should only be used for what they consider to be essential services. And so maybe there's something in the current ballot language that they don't view as essential. And so those are the themes that come across among the no voters. We also wanted to ask only to those undecided voters, hey, are they leaning any particular way? And what's interesting is that, usually we see this kind of mirror the ballot test, but here there is a 2-to-1 ratio. I mean, folks that are leaning towards voting no, then yes, although more than half of them, 53%, are still undecided. And so clearly these are folks that just need more information in order to ultimately arrive at a decision. Again, this was only asked to undecided voters. Then, kind of shifting gears, we wanted to at least introduce or test the idea of expanding uses of the retained Tabor revenue. So would you support or oppose allowing the city to spend this revenue on other city needs and services, in addition to what was already in the ballot language from 2018? And 54% would support expanding the list of services. And so clearly there is at least some appetite for different services to be funded, but what we'll see is that in a lot of cases, it just means they kind of want this 3 similar buckets, but maybe expanded a little bit. So 54% would support, 35% oppose, and 11% don't have an opinion on this question. And you see here the strongly oppose also pops up as well, because again, that's a lot of the folks that say, this sounds to me like something that is gonna creep into services that they don't view as essential. And so there is kind of some stronger pushback to expanding the uses for the retention. When we ask them, okay, you said you would support the programs being funded, expanded, what would you like to be funding? And again, like I talked about, a lot of this is just the same buckets, but just maybe expanded a little bit. Things like public safety and security. So things like neighborhood watch programs, infrastructure improvements, maybe things that they're not sure if they're currently covered in the ballot language, but they'd like them to be. And then homelessness and affordable housing. Obviously, that's something that a lot of folks view as a major concern, which we saw earlier in the survey. The difficult thing about that group is that a lot of them don't necessarily agree on the solutions to what they perceive to be important issue. And then infrastructure improvements and recreational community services, which again are just expansions of kind of those two buckets or those two categories that are already there. Among the folks that would oppose expanding the list of city services, it's a lot of the same things as before. It's just a general distrust of government and preference for the refunds to be returned to them. And it's also just satisfaction with how things are currently going. They don't really see a need to change the current allocation of funds and services from these Tabor retained funds. concerns over what they perceive may be an increase in government size and spending if we allow these the expanded list of services, and then just misgivings again about funding priorities and allocation, where they want things to be directed towards what they consider to be important and don't want what they consider to be non-essential services to be included, which obviously is something that could be possible if the list were expanded. And among the folks that are undecided, we also wanted to say, what is it that makes you undecided? A lot of it's just wanting to see more transparency or more specifics about how the funds would be used, and also just wanting to make sure that their key issues are prioritized before they really make a commitment to voting yes, and also wanting to see some kind of direct impact or personal benefit for themselves. They need to be assured of that before they would say, yes, I'll support expanding the list of services. We then wanted to break out just, again, these same categories of would you support funding these categories with retained TABOR revenue. Obviously, some of these are already funded, things like roadway maintenance, resurfacing, snow plowing, and street sweeping. 70% would support using retained TABOR revenue for that purpose. Parks and recreation planning and management, that's 67%. So those are the top two. Housing affordability, 62%, homeless services, 61%, and police services at 61%. So those are really the top five in terms of what folks would like to see retained TABOR revenue spent on. And then going down to the next slide here, things like sustainable infrastructure. You'll notice that the strongly support, the intensity really drops off on this slide. Economic development, community outreach and communication, residential and commercial permitting, and city events and gatherings. So those last two were falling beneath 50% that would actually support using retained TABOR revenue for them. But this, again, just kind of helps you to get some sense of what folks view as the top priorities for how these funds should be spent. And then with that, we have the demographic slides. As I mentioned earlier, these are weighted to reflect what we project turnout to look like in November on things like gender, age range, and party affiliation. You also see the rent versus own breakdown there, and race, ethnicity demographics, income demographics. So I was pleased that we got a pretty good split among the income groups there in the city. There wasn't anywhere where we were dramatically lacking. Things like marital status, their likelihood to vote. Obviously, the vast majority of these folks are going to be very likely to vote in November. And then their tenure, or how long they've lived within the city of Lakewood. And we got, again, a pretty good mix of folks who are relatively new, 4 years or less, and then 20 plus years. And then, the two groups in between. So I feel like we're pretty confident that we're talking to a pretty good cross section of residents in Lakewood in this survey. And with that, I'll take any questions that you all have before we move on to the next kind of portion. Unless, Councilor Stewart, do we want to just move on now and then take questions?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right. So I will go ahead and take this last slide. We are now coming to really the meat of the study session, which is the consensus decision point that we need to make tonight. So we have 4 options. All of these are based on the community survey. And so want to just kind of present them to you really quickly. Option 1 is if we want to move forward with keeping and testing the exact same ballot language and system as is currently in place in the city of Lakewood right now. So this would not be expanding any allowable uses or services, which does run somewhat contrary to what we were seeing in the survey, which is that the community is supportive of perhaps expanding some of the allowable uses of potential retained TABOR dollars, should we be able to do that, to be able to have some more flexibility around services. And I will just note that this does not provide that flexibility and does not is not quite as long-term sustainable, just simply because of how restrictive the current ballot language is. Option number 2 is to expand the existing services, kind of like Ryan spoke to, keeping those same 3 kind of public safety, parks and open space, community resources, and public works and infrastructure categories from the current Tabor pause, but expand like the community indicated that they might be supportive of for broader and more long-term sustainable use and more flexible use within those basic city service categories. Option number 3 would be to do the same thing as option number 2, but expand the acceptable usage categories and add an affordable housing solution as a 4th bucket, which Ryan alluded to. Might be tricky since a lot of folks have different definitions of what housing affordability might look like or mean, or what the solutions are under in that. But we wanted to include this as an option since that definitely rose to the top as obviously a concern that I think most of us are very aware of in the city of Lakewood. And then option number 4 is do nothing and do not move forward. I want to frame this discussion. We have a very large group of folks since we've got our citizen members joining us as well. And I know that the community survey is really interesting and there's a lot to dig into. And I also know that folks might have questions for Ms. Bjorklund about budget forecasting and things like that. I do want to say that's not really what this conversation is about tonight. The conversation tonight is to use these previous 2 presentations and the information from them to contextualize the decisions on this slide. So if you are going to make comments and ask questions tonight, please direct those questions to helping you come to which of these 4 options you would support moving forward with, and nothing outside of that. If you would please indulge me, we have another really important topic, and this is the decision point that we need tonight. So when I hand this back over to Mayor Strom, I would just ask that everyone in your questions or comments, please indicate which one of these 4 options you are leaning towards supporting, just so that we can come to a quick consensus. This decision is needed tonight. So there is not an option to put this off. We are on a very tight timeline as we move forward with this. And so that is my big ask of all of us, is to please not be self-indulgent in our questions and wanting to dig into survey results that are really interesting, but don't necessarily help you come to a decision point, if that makes sense. So with that, I will lead off, and I will just say that I am supporting, as the chair of the Budget and Audit Board, what I think is the most fiscally responsible and the most in line with what we heard from our community members in the survey, with option number 2.
Mayor, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you to our chair of the Budget and Audit Board, Councilor Stewart, and Ms. Bjorklund and Mr. Winger. Thank you so much for all the work that you put into the presentation and leading up to that this evening. I want to make one quick announcement. LakewoodSpeaks.org is able to record public comment on this topic, and again, will be open until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And as Councilor Stewart did note, we have 2 very meaty topics this evening. So I would ask council to work really hard to adhere to that 5-minute limit that we have discussed earlier this year on ourselves, with questions and comments, so that we can move forward on our agenda efficiently. And with that, we will hit it on to our next raised hand, Councilor Matt Guerrero.
I'll start by signaling I think I'm most in favor of number 2. But I hope that there's like some opportunity, like the ways in which I would want to expand those is essentially to the sort of discussion of creating a little bit more flexibility in how things are being on how things are able to be spent, and in particular out of this fund, and in particular on sort of the idea the original buckets are policing specifically rather than, say, public safety, which I think has just like a lot broader implications in terms of various types of like social services, aid, et cetera, that we see as part of public safety. And our police here in Lakewood discuss all of those things as parts of public safety as well. So that for me is like the the main thing that I would be looking for, I think, in those expansions. But I did have a specific question about that, which is within the more like the question or like the quantitative polling, housing and then resources for homelessness were two different like things. And then there was a qualitative slide about what people were saying about what they would maybe want to see services expanded through this. And it had housing and homelessness listed as one thing. And so I was hoping that we could maybe get clarity about like how those topics were either being construed by either the pollsters or the community members as interconnected, different things, et cetera. Because I've also experienced like homelessness being in the public safety category or like in other things. And so that I felt a little bit confusing that there were two different or maybe three different ways that it was categorized.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. As you mentioned, when we introduced it in the survey, we did keep them separate. But the reason on the qualitative slide that they are kind of combined is that a lot of folks do talk about them kind of in terms that are very related in terms of making affordable housing more available as almost a solution to homelessness. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone conflates the two, but I think in terms of the folks that supported expanding the list of city services, there was enough of agreement or at least conflation between the two that's why they were combined on the qualitative slide. Where a lot of the disagreement comes in is among a lot of those folks who oppose expanding the list of services, where they aren't necessarily talking about the two in terms that are related. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think my other question is, how was affordable housing being talked about? Either how were we asking about it or what were people saying? Because given just like these high numbers, obviously on affordable housing, and which, of course matters a lot to lots of us, but I'm hesitant to put it in a ballot measure because it's so difficult to get the definitions on that right and to like actually structure it in a way that makes that kind of investment make sense. So like pulling things into the Tabor fund that we then don't have to spend out of the general fund allows us to figure out how to better fund affordable housing. This is my like line of reasoning. So my question is, how is that being talked about? Like, I think that one of the things is affordable housing has many legal definitions, but not really a great common like cultural or like public definition.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, I think for that reason in the survey, we wanted to keep it broad and just say, hey, do you think the city should be focused on affordable housing or housing affordability? Really just to again, just kind of validate what a lot of you are seeing as a major concern among residents. But then again, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, that the tricky part is that there's very little agreement on how to solve the problem. I mean, for a lot of folks, and you're exactly right, there is no common agreement on exactly what we're talking about. For a lot of folks, it's, oh, you should be, dropping property taxes. That would make my housing more affordable, right? And so it's the whole spectrum from that to, helping to, provide homelessness services so that they can achieve housing and everything in between. And so the survey certainly validated it as a concern, but you just kind of alluded to this, why there's kind of some hesitancy to really focus on that as a core in the ballot language is because there's very little agreed upon solutions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I want to say that is like my one, as it would be predictable, I think, and is probably similar for many of you, that is like my one thing is like, maybe we would expand it to that. But I have to say, given like other issue surveys I've been able to see about housing funding and what that means to people and the way that you have to define things, affordable housing to me would be very difficult to get right through a ballot measure, and adds a level of controversy to something that is already a little bit controversial. And so I remain, based on these answers, thank you, Mr. Winger, to feel really in favor of the idea of kind of keeping those core concepts and buckets and looking towards how to expand them most effectively.
Councilor Cruz.
Thank you for the presentation and for all of the work on the survey. And I guess my one question before stating my preference. So essentially our decisions are just between issue areas, correct? And all of them would reflect that same kind of 10-year pause language that was in the initial survey. Is that, no? Okay. Can we elaborate on that then?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. We have spoken about in the design of if we move forward with one of the options that does then warrant an additional survey, looking at whether or not there is a difference in support between a kind of long-term sunset, longer than 10 years potentially, or no sunset at all. So that is not a decision point that we have to come to tonight. That will be a decision point that will be after the next round.
Great. Okay, that's super helpful. I think I'm really interested in kind of thinking about with the long-term sustainability numbers that we got, what kind of the timelines look like. But from an issue areas perspective, I'll echo that I think option 2 makes the most sense to me. I think the definitions and how they are expanded is really important. I'll echo what Councilor Matt-Guerrero said of that piece of policing versus community safety, I think would be an important distinction for me, as well as the acquisition versus maintenance question, because that I think is critical to actually providing really high quality services, in addition to more access to parks. So that is my preference and my plea for how they are defined.
Councilor LeBear.
You're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry. I think the first thing I would say is that I think I liked option 3. I mean, I hate to limit myself on any options, but and I also think we need a robust conversation in the community about this. You know, and I feel like when we went through this process last time, we had a robust community conversation that really led to some heavy debates. And there were a lot of things that weren't in, you know, in our options when we went through this process last time. I mean, I remember sidewalks was a point of contention. Some people wanted the word sidewalks in there. Some people didn't. Streetlights were another one. Some people like broader language. So it's interesting to kind of be back in this process. But so I would just add, I think I like option 3 the best. I don't mind, you know, if we want to narrow it, we could say, you know, affordable housing fund. I think some specific, I think that might give some clarity to some people. I would also add on infrastructure. I'd like to add the word sustainability in there, sustainable infrastructure, frankly, because I just think we should be priming people to be thinking about those kind of investments, and that we need to be thinking long-term about the kind of infrastructure we want. So I hope it doesn't throw too much of a wrench into the conversation, but it is that if I'm remembering correctly on the slide, I think it was option 3 that had the affordable housing, and I would want to throw in the word sustainability somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, I fabulous presentations, really helpful study session. Thank you, Councilor Stewart, for all the work you've done on this over the last few months into the Budget and Audit Board. I favor option 2. I think this is a helpful, clear presentation. A lot of folks on council know I'm very passionate about affordable housing, and I remain passionate about affordable housing. And option 2 doesn't preclude any number of different pathways to working within our budget and with the city to fund affordable housing, right? We can look at sort of specific use fees that make sense. We can look at the broader budget, which is much larger than just this $8 million annual slice that we're looking at from Tabor. And the reality is $8 million per year is not a ton of money in the context of our budget. It's enough to be very important for all the reasons we've heard from Ms. Bjorklund. But $8 million split across the 3 buckets in option 2 is, there's a lot of needs in each of those buckets, right? So my fear, honestly, is as Councilor Stewart articulated, if we add in affordable housing fund, yes, there's a lot of interest in it, but it is in the eye of the beholder. And I worry it could become a shiny object where some folks that are opposed to the whole enterprise will sort of seize on that to potentially try to oppose, funding for all these other important priorities. And so that's my concern. And I think the stakes are sufficiently high that it's strategic to really tie this to the issues that seem like they're the most, sort of have the most consensus in the community. And I think the presentation persuades me that those are public safety. I think with the caveat that Councilor Cruz and Matt Guerrero already articulated, infrastructure and transportation, public safety, infrastructure and transportation, and parks and open space. I think there's plenty of good work there. My only question for Ryan, Ryan, you made an incredibly compelling presentation that this survey data reflects the composition of the electorate demographically across a bunch of different crosstabs. I guess my one question is, does the mere fact that someone was willing to respond to this text and sort of complete a 10-minute survey or whatever it was, or longer, does that potentially skew the results slightly toward maybe a slightly wonkier, group of people who might be more systematically likely to favor debrucing or favor a taper pause? Is that a valid concern?
Yeah, so I mean, I think anytime, anytime you're doing a survey really anywhere, there's obviously going to be a segment of the population that just is never going to participate in surveys, whether it's, a reasonably wonky survey like this, or whether it's just a really kind of basic kind of meat and potatoes type survey, or somewhere in between. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think obviously not everyone who's going to vote in November is going to be likely to participate in a survey, right? So, we're trying to cast a pretty wide net. We're trying to, reach as many folks as we can. So it is a concern kind of on the margins. I don't think it's so much of a concern that it makes me really doubt the results that we were able to obtain. But yeah, of course, there's certain demographic groups that are less likely to participate in surveys. Some of them are still going to be likely to vote yes, but some of them are going to be likely to vote no. And unfortunately, you can't survey someone who doesn't want to take a survey. So we just kind of have to live with that kind of built in a little bit of uncertainty. But again, I don't think it really, to me, I still feel very confident in these numbers moving forward.
Great. Thanks again. I definitely think that this process is coming to us and asking for direction tonight, and I don't think that's too much to ask. I think given the options, option 2 makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess my final argument, again, I mean, as someone who really wants to see a housing fund and affordable housing funded, I'm a little worried if we go back and we ask for more data on that question, it will dilute our efforts to collect data on the other dichotomy that Councilor Stewart already described, which is really important, which is this question of how do people feel about a permanent taper pause versus a finite defined one, right? I think that's the key question we want more data on. So I will be supporting option 2 tonight.
Thank you, Councilor Lowe. And we have no other hands up at this time. I will welcome anybody that has not raised their hand yet for comments or questions to go ahead and do so with their thoughts. And while we wait for that, I would echo that I too would be in support of option number 2. While this council has definitely made it known that addressing housing affordability and homelessness is important, I think, with $8 million a year, our parks and our streets, our public safety will definitely keep us busy. And this will continue to allow us to utilize the rest of our budget to address some of these housing related issues. So that's where I am on that topic. And with that, we'll hand over the floor to Councilor Sinks and then Councilor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I am also leaning for option number 2. I would find it handy to have to refer back to the wording on all of the points, to differentiate between 2 and 3. So if we could have that wording up again, just to refresh our minds. Thank you. And yeah, so the difference, do I read this correctly? So the difference is mainly that number 3 includes housing as a 4th bucket. Is that the main difference, would you say, Councillor Stewart?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm on the Housing Policy Commission that we'll hear from next. And I'm very concerned, of course, about housing, and I'm very happy about the things that we've put together. However, I think that, again, because the broad range of housing solution and affordability and things, I think it would be very good to, for me, to stick with option 2. That's how I'm leaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you. If I followed the presentation, and it was a great presentation, so if I did misunderstand it, it's totally on my end. Did I understand correctly that the likelihood of success, in other words, the voters approving, would be number 2 would be higher than number 1?
Yeah, so they're very close. They're very close to each other. Basically, I'll lay it out this way. So before they had any information, support was at 52% for number 1, basically leaving everything the same. After they knew the information, it increased to 56% for number 1. And then number 2 had 54% support. So they're really all kind of in the same ballpark. But number 2 was actually slightly lower than number 1 once they knew all the information that they read about in the survey, which was at 56. And number 2, or expanding the list, was at 54. But what I will point out is that, we asked for just generally, would you expand the services? And so we didn't ask for, would you expand them, but keep the same 3 umbrella categories? Like, that specific question wasn't necessarily asked in the survey. And I would imagine that support would have been higher for doing that.
My just caveat, I guess, and maybe you can elaborate for me, but you mentioned that a number of folks were interested but distrustful and said, I want to see what's in it for me before I really commit to it. If what I worry about is with option number 2 is that we be very specific as to what those expanded uses are. In other words, if it's so generalized that you could drive a truck through it and really put almost any kind of service in there, I fear that it won't pass. So I'm interested in providing a little more flexibility, especially in the area of parks, so that we can really expand our services at rec centers and improve some of the capital things in there and the trails and connectivity. But I think we have to be very specific, and I'm not really sure that the way it's laid out, what I'm looking at, is very specific at all.
I'm sorry, Councillor Ryan, did you say a number?
I didn't say a number. I still want to listen to what
Not yet.
people have to say.
Okay, we can come back. Mayor Pro Tem Shahrazadi.
Yes, thanks. I would be, for the reasons that were articulated already, leaning towards 2. I think the research from the survey sort of is important to me. 54% is a high threshold for me. And I think that there's some flexibility around how we can broaden some of those categories, but these are things that people are familiar with. So I think we can build on that. And I thought the point was important, just the nebulous definitions around affordable housing. I think that we will lose a lot of folks in that. And there's some really creative ideas in the conversation that we still have to get to for this evening. So for me, I would be leaning towards 2.
Thank you. So we do have a majority of 2s. I will, and Councillor Nystrom, if you wanted to say any words about that, happy to have the floor open up to you, or Councillor Ryan, if you wanted to, if we want to come back to you, or with the number that we have so far, I would say we do have a majority and can move forward, but want to make sure that we've got question answered before we move on to our second topic. Councillor Nystrom.
No, I don't have any questions. I do agree with Councillor LeBure about expanding the usage categories, but especially in terms of the sustainable infrastructure piece. I think that came across pretty prominently in the survey, and it's a significant concern from my perspective.
So are you saying you're 2, but would like to include sustainable infrastructure?
No, I was leaning towards 3 actually, but if there is a way to include sustainable infrastructure into, I'm okay with that. I just think that needs to be a call out.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, this will be, all of this feedback is super helpful and will help us in kind of crafting the next step. So yes, Councillor Nystrom, I hear you and many other people, and I think that there is definitely a way to do all of those things and still keep it, to Councillor Ryan's point, under these 3 buckets that are very widely supported by the community and these basic city services.
Thank you. Councillor Cruz.
Thanks. Maybe just a procedural question, but since I know this is like a joint study session with our budget and audit board, I would love if any of our other community members, fellow budget and audit board folks, have any preferences, to know that, as that informs, you know, our majority or our consensus as well.
Board Member Henspark. Yeah, I think you might be on mute. Did you call in on your phone by chance? Could the phone be on mute and the computer's not?
Mayor, I can send Deb the call-in info. She can maybe try to call us, connect. So maybe if she passes for now.
Okay. Yep, we'll go to Board Member Wolf.
I lean towards number 2. I really appreciate the conversation tonight and the survey results and the presentation. I think as an individual, it's really easy to vote and lean towards action of things that you actually will be impacted by and see. So much easier to go towards a streetlight than towards economic development. And I'd be just really interested in this council thinking, and budget and audit committee as well, just thinking through how to help share out outcomes, because it's just as important to have a good maintenance building for the park service as it is to have a great park.
Hi, this is David. Can you hear
Yes.
me? That's
We
good.
hear you. Yes.
Sorry, having a little video issues. I'll get all these issues straightened it out. But I think initially when this was presented to the Budget and Audit Board, I said, wow, we did a great job last time we did this. Don't change anything. But I understand after all this discussion and what we have done, I think it's great to add a few more topics. My selection would be number 2. I don't want to get too far down and get too general, because I don't think 54%, 56%, wherever we're at. I mean, we don't have a lot of margin here for confusion with the voters and everything of what we're doing. But no, I like number 2. Let's look at it. God, we had a good roadmap the last time we did that, and let's continue with that. So that would be my agreement.
Thank you. Do we have Ms. Hinsbark back and with audio?
I don't believe so, Mayor. I did shoot her the instructions to call in. Sometimes that can take a second.
Okay, well, I do have a hand up from Councilor Ryan, so I'll keep an eye out for Ms. Hinsbark.
So I am leaning towards number
Councilor
2
Ryan.
again. Sorry, Mayor. I am leaning towards number 2. I do want us to be very careful with the wording to make sure that we're very specific about how we are broadening those categories, given the previous board members' comments about we are kind of pretty close. I mean, we do have great support, but I don't want to lose any support with mistrust.
Thank you. Well, I hate not to hear from Ms. Hinsbark, but I'm not seeing her in either our panelists now or attendees. With that, I would go ahead and just ask Councilor Stewart, do you feel like you and Ms. Bjorklund, do you feel like you guys have the information that you need to go ahead and move forward after our conversation this evening? Is there anything else you need?
Nope. Thank you, everyone.
I don't have anything else. That was very helpful information, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for the work on that. And with that, we will go ahead and move over to our second presentation of the night. And this one will be an update from our Housing Policy Commission. And with that, I will hand over the floor to the chair of our Housing Policy Committee, Councilor Mayra Guerrero. She will introduce the topic and our presenters and lay the groundwork for the direction the conversation will go this evening on that topic. Councilor Mayra Guerrero.
Fabulous, thank you. So we are going to start with a presentation about many of the housing initiatives that are already in process. And I want to also premise this conversation with the Housing Commission. Really, I think it's obviously a very big policy area. And so what we're really trying to do tonight is to essentially, with a full body, like set some North Stars on directionality with, again, like there are potentially an infinite number of additional small and large policy concepts that are not within this memo. And it doesn't mean that we will never consider them, that there's not a place for them to come up. This is not something that's meant to be like extremely ironclad, but more a way to see consensus, to ensure that like we're taking the right overall approach and not really missing something, or and really also trying to be transparent with the full body, with the community, et cetera, about where we're going. So our last Housing Policy Commission, we actually had lots of folks there and present and discuss. So we were able to see this presentation about like what's already happening, but we also got to talk to West Petro. We got to talk to additional members of the planning department, the planning commission, and like dig in on sort of all of the various threads to think about how to approach this. So we are going to start with this overarching presentation, and then the short memo that was in your packet this week was it's sort of the premise of like where we need to get to, and I'll talk us through kind of like what I mean by that after we've gotten this overall presentation.
Are we ready to hand it over to Mr. Parker?
I'm certainly ready to start. Good evening, Council.
All right.
Travis Parker, Planning Director, and happy to chat with you this evening. This is a re-presentation of some information that I presented to the Housing Policy Commission back in April. At that time, Planning Department was joined by Public Works, by our consultant Root Policy Research, by Metro West Housing Solutions. I'm going to be doing the presenting tonight, but those were the folks that were involved in the previous discussion. So as you saw in the previous discussion about budget and about serving the community, housing and homelessness are among the top priorities of our community, and they are certainly a growing area of focus for staff. Today is the start date of Chris Connor, who is the new Housing and Livable Communities manager for our housing and homelessness initiatives. He is joined by another recent hire, Rebecca Radaba, who is our homeless response coordinator. Sharon Terrell works in the comprehensive planning division, but is supporting our affordable housing efforts and also offering CDBG support. And we're, over the next year, we'll be adding a couple more positions as well. We are in the process of hiring a CDBG program manager that should be starting later this summer. And then early next year, we hope to hire a housing navigator as well to, again, all of these people are focused on housing affordability and combating our community's homelessness issue. So certainly a focus of the staff effort among the community right now. One of the primary areas that we've been working on over the past year has been implementation of the Proposition 123. So as a reminder, Proposition 123 was passed last year by the Colorado State House. It is a bill that provides funding for local governments in exchange for a commitment to provide a certain amount of affordable housing. Lakewood's commitment is to provide 475 affordable units over 3 years. That 3 years has started January 1st of this year, and it wraps up December of 2026. So by December of 2026, we are obligated under our commitment under Prop 123 to provide 475 affordable units in the city of Lakewood. Just some things to keep in mind. Prop 123 does not promise direct funding to participating cities, but it creates a number of grant and funding opportunities that cities can apply for. So we can apply for funding for staff positions. We can apply funding to buy property. We can apply for funding to, a lot of these things on the screen. There's a support fund, there's a financing fund for land banking, for services for homelessness, et cetera. And we are looking into a lot of those programs right now, and some of which I'll talk about in coming slides. In terms of meeting our commitment for 475 affordable units, we have 44 units, so about 10% or less of those already in our pipeline in one project under review for Metro West Housing Solutions. And we are in discussions now for projects between a number of projects for a total of between 200 and 600 units that we anticipate to start within the next year. So we are on course, I think, if a number of these projects do move forward to hit our target of 475 units in the next 2.5 years. One of the major requirements of Proposition 123 is creating an expedited review process for affordable housing. One of the most expensive parts of developing housing in general is the time it takes and the carrying cost of the land and the cost of time, the time commitment to developing these projects. So Prop 123 sets out a requirement that cities by that December 2026 date have to have in place a process to review and approve affordable housing developments within 90 days. Now that is quite a challenge if you consider our normal current, review process is anywhere from 6 to 12 months, for these site plan reviews. We're already in the process internally of creating this expedited review process of first, streamlining our review processes overall and getting everybody moving through the system faster. But specifically for affordable housing, we do hope to hit that 90-day window. We've already done a couple pilot projects, Solid Ground Apartments and the Whippoorwill development by Metro West. Neither, I don't think, hit that 90 days exactly, but we're certainly on course to create this. And there's a lot of moving parts with site plan review. As you can see on the screen, we're dealing with sustainability, we're dealing with engineering, we're dealing with the planning department, as well as outside reviewers like fire and school, et cetera. So a lot of moving parts in the review process for new development, but we have high hopes that we will far exceed our deadline of January 2027 to have that 90-day review process in place for these affordable developments. Another, that's right. Another area that staff has been focusing on is pallet homes. We have spent a lot of time researching, and I should say, pallet is a trademark, is a specific business. There are a number of organizations that now do these small relocatable shelters. So we have been researching the types and costs of these shelters and providing them in a community setting. Staff has toured sites in Denver and Aurora and looked at a number of different providers. We've looked at possible locations in the Lakewood area for providing pallet home communities. And we are currently looking, and we expect to bring to council in the next few months, some potential changes to the building and zoning code that would allow council to approve pallet home structures or relocatable small community structures. And then finally, there are a number of areas that we are looking within the zoning code for updates. Two things. As you know, you currently have on your schedule ADU changes. The city council did a study session, has an upcoming hearing on code changes to make ADUs easier to accomplish and to change some of the requirements on creating new ADUs. And then staff is currently, in the comprehensive planning process. We expect to accompany the comprehensive plan that comes to you later this year, early next year, with a number of zoning code updates that are based on the comprehensive plan process. So by early 2025, we expect to see a general update to the zoning code that includes a number of things, including an opportunity for 0 or reduced lot size residential lots. Another is the number of people per unit. For those of you that are aware, the state legislature just passed a new bill that limits or that prohibits local governments from limiting the number of people that can live within a single family unit. So we'll have to update our zoning code to match that new state law. And then, council has asked us and the Planning Commission to look at additional public reviews of new developments. So new site plans coming in above a certain size might have additional rounds of public review. And we need to look at the relationship between the public review process and that 90-day window that we have to approve affordable housing. So our zoning code will have to take all of that into account as well. All of that City Council can expect to see later this year or very early of 2025. That concludes what we're looking at as part of staff right now, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm joined by Shannon Terrell as well from the Planning Department, and we're here for your questions.
Mayor Strom, if I can add additional context before we go into questions. So much like Councilor Stewart set us up for success by saying, here are the decisions that we need to make, I'm going to try to add some clarity to that here. So I think, as you all know, this conversation was originally going to be like an entire workshop on the strategic housing plan. And I think that because we all really care about housing, affordability, the longevity, the sustainability, et cetera, we all really, really care about it. It was a priority in multiple ways in our annual retreat this year. And the HPC is the majority of council. It's 6 of us. So it is very, it's been very tricky to make sure that we're moving things in the right order with the right people clued in without sort of having the same conversations over and over and over. And I think in part, again, that is because of an attention to detail and an overall like enthusiasm and urgency around this topic, which all makes absolute sense. So I want to encourage us to really think about where we're trying to go from this conversation. Within the memo that was in your packets, it's on Lakewood Speaks, you will see that I have basically broken things up into 3 categories. So 1, priorities that are in progress, and you heard even more detail on that just now, because again, I think that that is one conversation where we do get like stuck in the weeds on like exactly how and where and when is this going to happen. But since those things are already happening, I think getting clarity about what that means, what the timeline is, et cetera, in this moment for questions is great. But I don't want us to get too stuck in things that are already moving at the expense of us moving more things forward. So the next category is things that the HPC thinks that we could, that we need to consider as a council. That doesn't need to go through like a whole process with the Housing Policy Commission separately, that we could start either through study session or first read, like however staff brings it to us, the conversation and actual lawmaking and amending and redlining that can happen with the full council. And those topics are about the code update for the relocatable structures, or commonly called pallet shelters. But again, that's one brand that we're not committed to. And to, have the full council's consensus that yes, we want that to be prioritized, scheduled, et cetera, and be moving. And then the other one is the reducing the minimum lot size that we got from the Planning Commission. So again, that is well researched. We have this resource. There are lots of ways to approach it, but if we get consensus here to direct staff essentially to bring us a proposed ordinance or solution on that. And then the last category is on what we think the Housing Policy Commission priorities should be. So again, these priorities are relatively large. So we were talking earlier about the TABOR cap and pause and whether or not to include affordable housing. And I will say, you can see that the first thing on our list is an affordable housing fund. And again, this is broad, right? And that's true for all of these. So inclusionary zoning, linkage fees, eviction prevention and renters' rights, land banking, and parking minimums are all, well, parking minimums sound more straightforward, but I think any of us who have had really intense conversations with folks know that they're not as simple as you think. And also the state has just updated their policies around this, which likely prevents us from actually having too much say at this point. So there's that. But the other ones here, I think, are sort of universally broad. There's lots of ways to approach them. There are lots of other municipalities in the area doing them differently. And so the idea with these priorities is that, and we all as a full body are in general alignment or agreement that we as the HPC should be spending our time learning these things, researching, stakeholding with the community, getting experts in, so that then we can develop some parameters with staff to like bring forward proposed ordinances or series of ordinances or other types of programs to achieve these kinds of things. So they're really, I recognize that they're sort of big buckets, but that is on purpose. So I, again, want to encourage us to not get too in the weeds of exactly how any of these one things would work, because we don't know the answer. That's why it should be an HPC priority for us to go find out. But I do think that things like, again, questions for staff on clarity about where things are, that help you feel like this is a good alignment. And also, I think speaking to either your values, your flags, your key principles, the things you want to make sure that we don't forget as we're having these conversations, are also really, really useful as we are working towards some proposals. So that was a lot. And yes, at this point, folks can discuss, ask questions of myself and others. And I also want to deeply encourage the other HPC members to correct me, to tell me what to say, what might be missing from the memo, or to add your thoughts in any way. I know that we've like discussed this a lot. And I did my best to capture sort of the nature and top lines without getting just like too heady. But I do really want to encourage all of the HPC members to actively be a part of this conversation and not to exclude yourself from adding to this just because we've had this conversation.
Mayor, you're on mute.
Gee, sorry. Thank you. See how many times we can do it in one night. Okay, so thank you, Councilor Matt Guerrero. I had one question for you as we work through this conversation. The to be considered portion, which is the relocatable shelters and the reducing minimum lot size. Do you need thumbs up, thumbs down for us on that? I think relocatable is already being worked on.
Yeah,
to a degree.
These are both things that sort of already exist. I think I have heard that it is helpful if we as council are able to signal the level of urgency and importance that we feel about these things in order to ensure that they are getting agended in a timely way and signal to the community that they are moving. So yes, I think that would be useful. Unless Ms. Hodgson or Mr. Parker, your thoughts on that has changed significantly since last time we talked.
No, I think that's perfect, just in line with what staff was looking for. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I think, I think it is one of those things where yes, we've got sort of the knowledge and information on this, but we want to be like staff wants to be only putting in the right amount of energy if we're saying it's the right thing. So as the HPC, we are aligned that they're important, but really there's an important role here for the full council to signal priority if we think that they are, which I do.
Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and open up to council questions, but what I'm hearing from you is at the end, we're going to land on a thumbs up, thumbs down for the relocatable shelters as well as minimum lot size. And then you're looking for comments and thoughts on the HPC priorities list. Okay.
Yep. And that
perfect.
one's definitely
Thank
a little
you.
bit softer, but yeah, I think if we're fully missing something, we want to hear that. But if people have values, principles, or key things they want to make sure are getting incorporated into these conversations, we want to hear it.
Excellent. Okay, thanks so much. And we'll start with Councilor Stewart and then Mayor Pro Tem Shahrazadi.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to signal my gratitude to the Housing Policy Commission and the chair for putting together this beautiful memo and laying that out so nicely. This is so helpful. I know our housing policy plan that we approved was so giant, and I was personally just like really overwhelmed by it, even though it's all fantastic. So thank you all so much for working through this and kind of laying out especially the things that are in progress. And so I will just say, for expediency, that I am thumbs up on the 2 to be considered by council. I had the privilege of getting to tour pallet shelters with Councilor Sharzai in our first year on council. And so I'm just like, I'm so thrilled that this is coming before council. This is a great tool in the toolbox that we have for supporting folks who need shelter. And I'm really excited to move forward with making that more possible. And then reducing the minimum lot sizes was something that I actually asked the council to send to the planning commission. So I am, of course, very, very supportive of getting to actually hear about that policy and how it would look like rolling that out. And then as far as the HPC priorities, again, I am so grateful to all of your work. I know you're all incredible people with amazing minds and are very aligned with me in values around housing and housing affordability. So I am very, very happy to continue to follow your lead on this. It looks great. So thank you for putting this all together.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I would echo the support for just a really concise and easy way to follow along and all the great work that's happened. I know that this was a big lift in the Housing Policy Committee, so thanks so much. I would also be supportive of the to be considered 2 priorities that were identified. To be honest, there's not much in the housing policy plan that I'm not going to be supportive of. Like, we should do all of it, in my opinion. But if we need to chunk it out, great. Let's start with these 2. For the HPC priorities, I think these are fine. I wanted to get clarity on one thing, just this linkage fees. One thing that I feel may be missing, and this could be it, is just under 2A in the priorities, this modify the zoning ordinance and municipal code to create stronger non-financial incentives. I know some of us were disappointed that the tap fees bill didn't go as far as maybe we were hoping in supporting bringing down some of those costs. And so I would really advocate, there are 2 big projects coming to Ward 1 that I am concerned about, because we have water districts that charge such high tap fees. And so is there a way for us to prioritize some of those incentives? This is really pressing for Ward 1 in particular. And then that's it. This other question would pull us down a rabbit hole, and I refuse to do that. So that's it for me. So that would be the only thing I would flag for the HPC priorities. But other than that, really aligned with that. So thank you.
Thank you, counselors. That made that really easy for me to start archiving. So thank you.
Yes, I can quickly comment just on the linkage fees. They work a little bit like our the fees that we use even for green space, right? Where the idea is this has an impact in these ways, and so then we can specifically use it to offset that impact, which is the word is linkage, but so like potentially a tap fee. But the issue, of course, is that we don't govern our water not all of our water districts as a city. They're like separate governmental entities. And so I will just suggest that I think that one possible place that, and I'm saying it out loud for accountability, that might be something that we could think about is with what an affordable housing fund, like how it would work, what it would fund. Like there is a world where it just funds affordable housing projects, like helps to subsidize like CHAFA does, but there's also a world, and I think we've talked about this within the HPC, like all of these various ways that it could get funded and put out funds and all of the different things. So one thing we could do is like subsidize things like of that nature, but it wouldn't actually be reducing the fee itself. It would be us just having to figure out how to afford to pay for some of it. So again, not committed, but I think if it was going to fit somewhere, it's actually under that category, probably, given the governance structures.
We have an uncharacteristically quiet crew. All right, with no more business this evening, I know there's more to be said than this. Counselor Cruz.
Yes, yeah, I was practicing listening, so it's helpful to hear how other folks are processing the information. So just one point of clarity before expressing preferences for reducing minimum lot size. Is that going to be something we consider before the comprehensive plan, or is that something connected to the comprehensive plan?
So what I am and what the HPC I think is recommending is that it is something that we would essentially currently signal as a priority to come before us in a faster, more urgent manner, especially given the amount of legwork and research that has already happened. And again, I think there's really important details with how that would fit in with zoning and comprehensive plan. And I think that there are lots of places where how we want to make sure that we get that right. But yes, that I think is the recommendation as the HPC is like, we should put this on the books more urgently.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. And I would be supportive of that. That was mostly what I was getting at. Because I hope that this is happening sooner than that. So I would give the thumbs up to kind of the pieces that are already under consideration for the relocatable small shelter structures. I will practice that line, and the reducing minimum lot size. I think the priorities that are outlined, I think, are generally aligned as well. I'll just plug, I know you all had the impossible task of narrowing down a huge list of things that we all really care about. I do just want to continue to shout out permanent supportive housing, and do want that to continue to be a priority for us, recognizing that there are a lot of other important things on the list too. And just generally from a values perspective, I think that really just want to highlight and continue to center kind of our renters in the conversation, thinking about 40% of the city who does not always receive 40% or a requisite amount of attention. And so I think that the conversations around eviction prevention, about thinking about how to make sure folks are in habitable spaces and all of that really matters to me, and ensuring that our public funds, however we invest them through an affordable housing fund, go to the most vulnerable populations and the folks who are being least served by the market at this time. So want to just echo the gratitude for all of the work that has gone on and that you all are doing. And I support the priorities, just want to kind of state those values as food for thought as you all embark on this conversation.
Those are really, really helpful, Councilor Cruz. And in particular, I saw that our one comment on Lakewood Speaks today was about liking these priorities, but also wanting to see investment and discussion on permanent supportive housing. I think, again, it's one of those things where that very well may be something that we're prioritizing as something that gets funded through the Affordable Housing Fund. I don't know. And I also want to say that the part of the trick with permanent supportive housing is that like Lakewood is not currently equipped to be who does that, but we would work with partners through Jefferson Center or Metro West Housing, and that's not the type of like social infrastructure that we have as a city, which does not mean that we don't want to then help invest in it, just to be clear. But that, yes, is definitely something that is critical.
Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, just briefly, I would echo a couple of points that Councilor Cruz made, but I want to give a quick shout out as well to our chair, Councilor Maya Guerrero. I think she really did help focus the Housing Policy Commission on, you know, this mess, this incredible, this boil the ocean problem, and really forced us to think efficiently and prioritize, and get a workable shortlist in front of council in pretty impressive record time. So gratitude for that. And as a member of the HPC, I fully endorse the memo. I think it's a good list. 3 quick points. One, since it sounds like city staff is looking to us for sort of signal on urgency, I would just really double down, and I think this list is urgent in terms of action. You know, we just had a discussion on the budget and audit board where we sort of talked through the merits of option 2 versus option 3, landed on option 2 for all the reasons we discussed. And I think the corollary of that is there is, I mean, we just saw really compelling polling data that validates what we've all been hearing from our constituents. There is a real appetite in the city for more affordable, attainable housing and for council to act on that. We've been working hard and staff has been working, frankly, harder. And, this council's been around 6 months and the clock is ticking. I really, over the next, 18 months before the next round of municipal elections, I think it's just important. I think we owe it to constituents to have passed some of these as ordinances. I don't think it's going to be acceptable to go to the voters and say, well, we're working on all this stuff. And we won't. We'll have done more stuff by then. We've already done stuff. We'll do more stuff. There's things that are in the works. But I think it is really important and strategic that this short list be prioritized. And to Councilor Myaguerre's point, that the HPC have the running room to work with the city resources that exist with the planning department, with the planning commission, and with Metro West Housing and the policy experts there to actually work on concrete language that will allow us to then bring some of these things as ordinances in front of council. Second point, looking at the HPC list, the HPC priorities, I think the one nuance I'd add to that list that I think reflects consensus of HPC is if there's one item on that list that is closer to shovel ready, it is probably at least creating an affordable housing fund, not necessarily all of the aspects of how you structure that fund, but the act of like creating the fund so that there is at least a sort of a skeletal, the structure of a vehicle where, specific use fees could start going, like to sort of as a down payment on this challenge. So I would suggest that maybe one thing we can hopefully move relatively quickly on this list is working with the CFO to tee that up as an ordinance. And finally, I would just second what Councilor Cruz already said eloquently, and the one comment on Lakewood Speaks. Through sheer necessity, there was a need to sort of prioritize things that either were shovel ready or could become shovel ready. And I think this list does that. And to the extent there are any other things, that I just don't want what we decide here tonight to preclude council from also being able to act on permanent supportive housing over the next year or two, to the extent that there are any other sort of like actionable, doable things that we can tee up for council action on that. And I think that's really important.
Thank you, Councilor. You mentioned being supportive of the memo and the HPC. Could you point out for me explicitly on the relocatable and the lot sizes? Are you supportive of moving,
Yes.
asking staff to move forward there? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm supportive of all three buckets of the memo as laid out. With sort of the nuance I just articulated, but in terms of what we decided tonight,
perfect.
I think we should full speed ahead on these three buckets.
Thank you. Councilor LeBure.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of echo what Councilor Lowe said on the Affordable Housing Fund. I think that's really one of the key things we can do that actually could make a significant difference, is having a parking lot for us to be able to put resources in whenever we have opportunities to put resources in. And then I would just say, yes, I would support all the priorities as our committee has come up with. So hopefully, if you need clarity on that, let me know. Thanks.
Councilor Nystrom.
Yeah, thank you for tackling this very large effort. Nice work. And I do just want to call out, like, I am in support of the efforts here and what's been identified in the buckets, but I do think we have an opportunity here to leverage some, not that that's not being done, but leverage knowledge outside of the immediate group and cast of characters typically. And I noticed that Councilor Ryan called this out in his notes, but that we have an opportunity here to get involved with the consultant to look at how we can make homeownership more attainable, as well as to partner with the VA or HUD to, tap into some of that expertise on the housing fund and how that can be leveraged. I know Councilor Maya Guerrero, you're very passionate about homelessness and all of that. And as am I, and especially in terms of the impact on veterans and how that continues to be an existing problem. So, and again, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Those are very.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to be super clear that its support of the work in the memo also did include the 2 relocatable shelters and the minimum lot sizes. Sorry, I blanked out for a second there.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Nystrom,
Councilor Matt Guerrero.
Thank you. Councilor Nystrom, those are incredibly helpful, validating things to bring into the space. I think that I'm going to talk a little bit more about our next steps when we've kind of worked through the discussion here. But one of those things is we are going to work on a little bit further out about what we think our topics are going to be. And then, that will be obviously public, and I would be very, very inviting of and welcoming of if you all have specific experts that you want to suggest or approaches that you want to suggest to me as chair, and then who gets to set the agenda. I would love to have those conversations. I think you all have parts of community, parts of expertise that I don't necessarily share. And I want to make sure that we're trying to set this up in a way where those discussions are really meaningful. That's really very helpful to bring that into the space.
Councilor Sinks.
Thank you. Yes, so I serve on the commission as well, and have also appreciated our chair's focus and getting the whip out, and this is what we need to do. So it was very effective. So thank you for your leadership. Of course, I'm supportive of the memo and especially the relocatable shelters, as well as the reducing the minimum lot size, knowing that there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done yet, to flesh that out. I also appreciated Councilor Nystrom's thought about bringing in the VA, the vets, as well as HUD too. That would be we brought in many other experts at our last meeting. However, we didn't bring those in. And so that's a great idea. Thank you for that. So we look forward to fleshing out many other things here. A lot of, as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. And so we'll try to get the devil out of there and get the details all worked out for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I will go on the record of being supportive of moving forward, discussing the relocatable shelters and minimum lot sizes too. As I would imagine, Councilor Matt Guerrero, you're probably in there as well. Would you confirm or deny? Okay.
Yes.
Confirm.
Yeah, enthusiastic.
All right.
Nothing like being the memo drafter to feel really good about what it prioritizes.
Thank you for that. The only one we haven't heard from is Councilor Ryan. Councilor Ryan, would you like to give your comments, or do you have any thoughts, questions you'd want to contribute? I know you likewise are on the committee, so you've been through lots of these conversations.
Yeah, I didn't have anything more to add. I'm supportive of of conversations about these subjects. As Councilor Sinks put it, it's the devil's in the details. So generally agreeable about, for example, the portable homes, but maybe not everywhere in the city makes sense for portable homes.
All right.
But the answer to your question is yes. I was on as to all of the issues.
Okay. So we are walking away this evening with consensus on moving forward with the relocatable shelters and minimum lot sizes. Councilor Matt Guerrero, do you have anything else, any more direction, or I would even say, Director Parker, do either of you, are there any holes in the information that you are maybe looking for from council tonight that we want to make sure we address before we get off this evening?
I wanted to just walk through a couple of next steps because I think, I'm sorry, Director Parker, were you going to say something?
No, not at all, please.
Both as a way to, like the HPC does have, it's a larger committee than some, but it is still just a committee. So in order to make sure that, I know that study sessions are more watched, spread around, et cetera, by the public. And I know that more staff are in attendance and watching as well. And so I just want to also, for the full council transparency, for the full city transparency, for the public transparency, to just talk a little bit about our next couple of things that we're going to do. So this was very helpful. I feel like this gives us sort of the space, the process, and the confirmation that we're going in the right direction. And then we're really going to work to figure out how to really run on some of these things and to really how to track and build the expertise needed to present some possible options in these spaces. And I want to specifically say that at our next meeting, which is in 10 short days, it is on May 30th, there will be 30 minutes of public comment at the start. And our hope for the topic of that public comment is going to specifically be about these priorities. And if, again, these same questions we just asked council. How do these priorities line up for you? What are the values or the specifics within some of these things that you want to make sure that we are considering and thinking about? And then we will also have our CFO be there to talk a little bit about the state of money on these things. And then the next thing that we're really trying to do, and I don't know if we'll fully complete it on the meeting on the 30th, but we'll begin trying to lay out sort of further scheduling of some of these issues. So kind of breaking down a little bit about the order in which we want to have these topics be coming up in the HPC, thinking about when to have the most productive public comment and ensuring that then we are finding the right experts, inviting them in a timely way in order to have this conversation. So this was, I think, really where we needed to get to in terms of all of those next steps, making sure that that's not going to end up being any wasted capacity, right? This was why we wanted to check in on this, is that if we're, as the HPC, directing staff to like run all over the land and like find all these experts and we're like meeting with all these people and then there's just one of these buckets of things is just not what the council or the community wants to be talking about, that would be an unfortunate waste of time and resources that are limited. And so this is great because this signals to us that that's the right thing for us to continue to do. And so we will be trying to work on creating a little bit longer term of a plan. It'll probably take us a little bit to get great at that, but that's some of our next steps.
Thank you. That was great. We appreciate it. It was fun to see the progress we've made. Sometimes we go to these committee meetings and we don't always feel the progress. So thank you for laying all that out for us. All right, well, we'll transition over. Before we adjourn this evening, study sessions are the time that we also open up space to report out on committees. So I would extend an invitation to any of our committee chairs that would like to report on progress being made on committees, or upcoming meetings, or the like. Does anyone have a report they'd like to give for committees? Councilor Sinks.
Yeah, I'll be brief and just say that tomorrow we have a Head Start committee meeting, and the director sends quite an involved packet. We'll review the fiscal reports and consider school calendars and their outcomes, etc. So a meeting tomorrow and a little reminder to those that are on the committee. So thank you in advance for your work on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Cruz.
Thank you. I'll provide a brief but jam-packed update on our legislative committee. So as most folks are probably aware, the legislative session did end on May 8th. So throughout session, we took a position on about 13 bills. And as a reminder, we are part of Colorado Municipal League. They really serve largely as our lobbyists, right? And they track over 100 bills. So these were 13 bills that we wanted to focus on specifically within that. And of those 13, we took 5 active positions. So just wanted to give a little bit of an update on where some of those things landed. One, HB 24-1168, equal access to public meetings, which we kind of ended up in an oppose unless amended position, recognizing we were in line with the value of wanting equal access to meetings, particularly for members of our disability community. But the logistics and some of the ways that it was written would make it very difficult and open us up to legal liability. So that bill did not pass. So likely conversations will continue on that going forward. HB 1304 minimum parking requirements, which was already mentioned, did pass. We were in a strong opposed position on that, and we're going to learn more about what that's going to mean for the city of Lakewood moving forward. 1463 restrictions on tap fees was mentioned. So we were in a strong support position on that bill, which would have sought to bring more accountability to how tap fees are set by our water districts. It did end up in kind of a transparency bill. So we can get more information on kind of how tap fees are set moving forward during this summer. We also supported a vulnerable road user protection bill. However, the version of the bill we supported died, and then a different version came about that we didn't love as much. So there will be more funds, however, for pedestrian, bicyclists, and other types of safety projects. And then finally, SB 2494, safe housing for residential tenants. So really strengthening our warranty of habitability laws. That bill did pass, was signed into law by the governor. And so we will be kind of probably reconvening in July or so to learn more about what staff have to say about the kind of implications of the legislative session for the city of Lakewood. So thanks for all of my wonderful committee members for all of your work, and to Mr. Goldstein for being our main support throughout session, and looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you, Councilor. You did an amazing job moving through that very quickly. That was a lot. I know it was a big session this year. Any other committee reports? All right. Before I adjourn, one quick announcement to make tonight. We just had a change to our agenda that affects the next study session. So 2 weeks out, the topic is Planning Commission recommendation on car washes and fueling stations, and that meeting needs to be canceled. Council meeting canceled. The chair of our Planning Commission is no longer able to join us on that date, and he would be an important speaker that evening. So we will stay tuned for a reschedule of that, and being so close to the date, because of the amount of time it takes to have everything public in advance and the packets all ready to go, we don't have enough time to pivot to a new topic. So call that a gift of time for everybody, an extended Memorial Day weekend, whatnot. But wanted to let everybody know as soon as possible that the change on that calendar there. And that is all I have. So seeing no more further business, I will go ahead and adjourn this evening's study session at 9:32 p.m. Thank you, everyone.